I came home earlier than usual that evening, the air outside thick with humidity, hinting at the storm that was soon to hit. The house was too quiet, almost unsettling. Normally, I would hear the TV on or the clatter of dishes in the sink, but tonight, nothing. The usual sounds of Sarah moving about, or at least some background noise, were missing. I still had my mind cluttered with work stuff, deadlines, meetings, the usual grind. All I wanted was to open a cold beer and collapse on the couch, maybe catch a break before Sarah came in to chat about whatever she had been up to that day. But the second I stepped inside, something felt different. Not something I could put my finger on at first, just off. The air was heavier than usual, like the house itself was holding its breath. I stood still for a moment, listening, trying to figure out what had shifted. No TV, no footsteps coming toward me. Just silence. I headed upstairs, feeling that familiar knot forming in my gut. Call it instinct or something deeper, but I knew something was wrong. As I reached the top, I slowed my steps, not wanting to make a sound. That is when I heard it, a faint, muffled noise that stopped me cold. A groan, barely audible, but enough to send a wave of dread through me. I did not want to believe it, but there it was again, louder this time. The sound of movement, coming from our bedroom. I crept closer, the soft carpet masking my footsteps, and nudged the door open just enough to peek inside. That is when I saw them, Sarah, my wife, lying underneath someone, her face flushed and lost in the moment. And the man with her? Jake, my best friend, the guy who had stood next to me at our wedding, the man I trusted more than anyone outside my family. They were wrapped around each other on the bed Sarah and I had shared for years. Jake's body pressed into hers, moving in a way that made my stomach twist. The betrayal hit me like a fist to the gut. I could not think, could not breathe. I just stood there, watching the two of them, my fists clenched so hard my knuckles went white. I wanted to burst in there, rip them apart, scream, demand answers. But I did not. Instead, I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. Every part of me wanted to storm in and destroy them right then and there, but I knew better. No, that would be too easy, too quick. They would see my pain, see me break, and I was not about to give them that satisfaction. I made my way downstairs as quietly as I had come up, every step feeling heavier than the last. My mind was reeling, a storm of fury, hurt, and something colder, something more deliberate. Once outside, I slipped into my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. The rain had started, falling in slow, steady drops, but I hardly noticed. My mind was too busy replaying what I had just seen. Sarah, Jake, together. It felt like everything I had ever trusted had shattered in an instant. My best friend, the guy I had shared everything with, had taken what was mine. And Sarah, my wife, the woman I thought I knew, had thrown everything we built aside for some cheap fling. But I was not going to react like they expected. No, I was going to make them both pay, piece by piece. This was not about confrontation. It was about destruction. I took a deep breath and let the rage settle into something else. A plan. I was going to dismantle them both, slowly, methodically. Sarah and Jake had no idea the trap they had just stepped into. They thought they had gotten away with it, thought I was none the wiser. They were wrong. I sat there in my car for what felt like hours, watching the rain splatter against the windshield. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought I might break it. The images of them, tangled up in our bed, kept flashing in my mind like a nightmare I could not shake. It was the kind of betrayal that does not just wound you. It guts you, leaves you hollow inside. But rage alone was not enough. No, I needed to think, to plan. I would give them time. Enough time to believe they had fooled me, that they were safe in their little affair. Sarah would go on playing the devoted wife, acting like nothing had changed, cooking my dinners, asking about my day. And Jake, he would keep pretending to be my friend, like he had not destroyed the one thing in my life I thought I could count on. They thought they were clever, sneaking around, hiding their affair. But I was going to show them what real cleverness looked like. I was not going to blow up my life in one messy, emotional explosion. No, I was going to take them apart slowly. By the time I was done, they would be standing in the rubble of their own lives, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. And Jake had no idea just how personal this was going to get. He had his wife, Emily, his perfect little family that he paraded around like a trophy. Well, if he was so intent on wrecking my life, then it was only fair I returned the favor. I would not just take Sarah from him. I would take Emily too, but not the way he took my wife. No, I would do it carefully, deliberately. I would make her fall for me, make her doubt everything she thought she knew about her husband. In the end, she would come to me, not out of lust, but because she realized I was the better man. And Jake, he would watch his life crumble from the inside out. I smiled to myself, the first real smile I had managed since walking into that bedroom. This was not the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of their downfall. I started the car and drove off into the night, the rain pounding harder now, but I barely noticed. The anger that had been boiling inside me had sharpened into something else, something colder. I was no longer just the betrayed husband. I was the man who was going to take back control. And the best part? They would never see it coming. The next day, I started setting the pieces in motion. I reached out to Emily, keeping it casual. I asked how she was doing if she wanted to grab coffee sometime. We had all been friends for years, so it would not raise any red flags. Just a friendly check-in, nothing more. But in my mind, I already knew where this was heading. She responded quickly, sounding eager. I could tell she had been looking for a distraction from whatever was going on with her and Jake. Within a few days, we had set a time to meet. It was perfect. Jake and I had always been close, so Emily would not suspect a thing. She had no idea that the man she was meeting for coffee was not just a friend, but the man who was about to take everything from her husband. We met at a quiet little cafe in town, the kind of place where people mind their own business. Emily looked worn out, like life had been weighing heavy on her lately. I could see it in her eyes, the way she smiled. There was something missing. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and that is exactly what I needed. "Thanks for meeting up," I said, keeping my tone easy, light. "It has been too long." "Yeah, it has," she replied, her voice soft, almost fragile. "Things have just been busy." Busy. I knew exactly what she meant without her having to explain. Ryan, her perfect husband, was anything but. I had seen the cracks in their marriage long before this. Jake was too arrogant to see it himself. But Emily, she had been hurting for a while now. All I had to do was listen, let her talk, and she would tell me everything I needed to know. I asked her about the kids, about life in general, all the small talk to ease her into it. But then I shifted the conversation, just enough to let her open up about what really mattered. "It just feels like Ryan and I are drifting," she admitted after a while, her gaze dropping to the table. "Like we are not connecting anymore." I leaned in a little, my voice quiet and understanding. "I am really sorry to hear that, Emily. You deserve better than that." Her eyes met mine, searching for something, maybe validation, maybe just someone to tell her she was not crazy for feeling this way. "You have always been such a good friend," she said, a sad smile on her lips. "I do not know what I would do without you." I gave her a warm smile, the kind of smile that made it easy for her to trust me. "You are not alone, Emily. Anytime you need to talk, I am here." She smiled back, but it was that same sad smile, the smile of someone who was just starting to realize that her perfect life might not be so perfect after all. And that is exactly what I wanted. I needed her to doubt, to question everything. By the time I left the cafe that afternoon, I felt a surge of satisfaction. It was all falling into place. Slowly, carefully, I was pulling her away from Jake, just like he had done to me with Sarah. But this was different. I was not rushing into anything. I was going to make sure Emily came to me on her own, without even realizing it. And by the time Jake figured out what was happening, it would be too late. I got into my car, the rain still falling lightly, and drove off. The storm had not passed. In fact, it was just getting started. The days following my coffee with Emily passed in a blur. I played my part well, acting like the oblivious husband at home, all the while laying the groundwork for what was to come. Sarah kept up her charade too, sending sweet little texts during the day, talking about plans for the weekend. It was almost laughable how easily the lies slipped from her lips, as if she thought I had no idea about her affair with Jake. They had grown careless, and I could feel the tension in the air every time I looked at her. But I knew better than to confront her outright. No, that would be too easy, too impulsive. I wanted them both to believe they were getting away with it. The more they thought they had fooled me, the more satisfying it would be when their worlds finally came crashing down. And Emily, while she was starting to come around, Since our coffee, she had been texting me more, confiding in me about her problems with Jake. It was subtle at first, the way she reached out, but I could feel her slowly leaning into me, trusting me in a way she never had before. Every message she sent was like a little victory, pulling her further away from Jake, creating a distance between them that he could not even see. By the end of the week, I decided it was time to take things further. Jake had mentioned that he would be out of town for a work conference. It was the perfect opportunity. His absence would give me the chance to push my plan forward with Emily. Friday night, I sent her a message, keeping it simple. Need some company tonight? Her response came almost immediately. I could really use the distraction. I did not waste any time. The drive to her house felt short, but my mind was racing with anticipation. I knew exactly what I was going to do. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets wet and glistening under the streetlights as I pulled up outside her house. Everything about that night felt inevitable. Emily opened the door with a tired smile, her eyes red from what I could only assume had been a long, emotional week. I could see the weight on her shoulders, the exhaustion that came from feeling like her marriage was crumbling around her. "Perfect. Thanks for coming," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "It has been a lot lately." I gave her that same reassuring smile I had been perfecting over the past few weeks. "I'm always here when you need me." We settled into the living room, the lights dim and the house quiet. She poured us each a glass of wine, and we sat on the couch, close but not too close. Not yet. We talked for a while about everything and nothing, the kids, work, little things that kept the conversation light. But I knew it would not stay that way for long. As the wine flowed and the evening grew darker, Emily started to open up, her voice softer, more vulnerable than before. "I do not know how much longer I can keep pretending everything is fine," she whispered, her gaze dropping to her lap. "Ryan is never around anymore, and when he is, it is like he is not really here. I feel like I have lost him, or maybe I have already lost him." Her words hung in the air, thick with the kind of emotion I had been waiting for. This was the crack in her armor I had been hoping to find. I reached over and placed my hand gently on hers, my touch soft but deliberate. "You have not lost him, Emily. But maybe it is time to stop holding on to something that is not there anymore." Her eyes met mine, searching for some kind of reassurance. "I just do not know what to do," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel so alone." I leaned in slightly, just enough to make my intent clear, but not enough to scare her off. "You are not alone," I said quietly. "I am here. I have always been here." The space between us seemed to shrink in that moment, the tension building until it was almost palpable. And then, without hesitation, Emily leaned in, her lips meeting mine in a tentative, soft kiss. It was as if she was testing the waters, seeing if this was really happening. I kissed her back, letting the moment linger, feeling the warmth of her lips against mine. When I pulled away, her breath was shaky, her eyes wide with the shock of what she had just done. I should not have done that," she stammered, her voice trembling as she pulled back. "I am sorry." I shook my head, keeping my voice gentle and soothing. "Do not apologize, Emily. You did nothing wrong." She looked at me, confusion and guilt battling behind her eyes. "But Ryan," her voice trailed off. I finished the sentence for her. "He is not here, Emily. And even if he was, would he even notice what you were going through?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. She had crossed the line, and she knew it. But the truth was she did not regret it, not really. She was torn between the guilt of betraying her husband and the relief of finally feeling something real again. "I just feel so lost," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I took her hand again, squeezing it gently. "You are not lost, Emily. You are just starting to see things clearly." The silence between us stretched out, heavy with unspoken truths. She was on the edge, teetering between the life she had known and the possibility of something new. And I was right there, ready to catch her when she fell. This time, when she kissed me, there was no hesitation. There was an urgency in her movements, a quiet desperation that had been building inside her for longer than she cared to admit. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. We moved together, slowly at first, savoring each touch, each moment. But as the night wore on, restraint gave way to passion, and we let go completely, leaving nothing unsaid, nothing undone. Hours passed in a blur of stolen moments, whispered confessions, and the quiet sounds of desire finally unleashed. When it was over, we lay there in the stillness of the room, the darkness wrapping around us like a blanket. Emily rested her head on my chest, her fingers tracing soft patterns along my arm. "I never thought I would do something like this," she whispered, her voice thick with exhaustion and something close to relief. I did not say anything. I just held her close, my fingers running through her hair as I stared up at the ceiling. I could feel the shift in her, the way she had crossed a line she could never uncross. And part of me reveled in it. Emily had been lost in her marriage for too long, but now she was mine. As she drifted off to sleep beside me, I could not help but feel that familiar surge of satisfaction. This was not just about the physical act, though that had been inevitable. This was about control, about turning the tables on Jake in a way he would never see coming. The beauty of it all was that Emily would never suspect this had been part of a plan. To her, it was a genuine connection, a moment born from neglect and loneliness. But to me, it was the beginning of the end for Jake. The weeks after that night with Emily passed quietly, but there was a palpable tension beneath the surface of everything. I kept moving forward, pulling strings in the background, being careful not to rush anything. Emily was drawn to me now, more emotionally invested with every day that passed. Her texts became longer, more frequent, and her desire to talk about her strained relationship with Jake grew stronger. Each conversation was like another knot tying her closer to me and further away from her husband. It was a delicate balance, though. I could not push too hard or too fast. I had to keep things subtle, careful, and make sure that neither Jake nor Sarah had any idea what was going on. Jake had no clue that his wife was confiding in me, leaning on me in ways she never did with him. And Sarah, well, she was completely oblivious, wrapped up in her own affair. She thought she had me fooled, which made it all the more satisfying to play the part of the clueless husband. I had upped my attention towards Sarah, too, complimenting her more, planning spontaneous date nights, and generally acting like the doting husband. If she noticed the sudden change in my behavior, she did not say anything. It was probably too convenient for her to question, and I wanted to keep it that way. Keeping her off guard was part of the plan. But Emily, that was where my real focus lay. The more she leaned into me, the more confident I became that everything was falling into place. Jake, that arrogant son of a gun, still had no idea that the ground beneath him was slowly shifting. He had stolen Sarah from me, but soon he would know what it felt like to lose everything. The perfect opportunity came about 3 weeks later when we were all invited to a dinner party at a mutual friend's house. It was the kind of casual gathering that, under normal circumstances, would have been just another night out. But nothing was normal anymore, not after everything that had been happening between us. Jake and Sarah were there, of course, playing their part as if their little affair was some well-guarded secret. They laughed and smiled, mingling with our friends as though they were not betraying the very people they claimed to love. It almost made me laugh how confident they were, how smug. They thought they had us fooled, but that night wasn't about them. No, tonight was about Emily. I stayed close to her throughout the evening, careful not to draw attention, but always nearby. There was an intensity in her eyes that I had noticed earlier, something weighing on her that I could not quite put my finger on. It was not long before she found an opportunity to pull me aside. She motioned toward the kitchen with a quick glance, and I followed her, curious and cautious. The kitchen was quiet, the sounds of the party fading as the door closed behind us. Emily's hands were trembling as she turned to face me, her face pale and her eyes wide with a mix of fear and something deeper. "What is going on?" I asked, keeping my voice low but steady. There was something wrong. I could feel it in the air. She took a shaky breath, her lips quivering as she finally looked up at me. "I do not know how to say this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just say it," I urged, stepping closer. I am pregnant," she blurted out, her words hanging in the air like a bomb. For a moment, I could not speak. My mind raced, trying to process what she had just said, but the weight of her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. Pregnant. Emily was pregnant. And it was not Jake's baby. I swallowed hard, trying to control the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. This had not been part of the plan. I had not expected this. "You are sure?" I asked, my voice low, my eyes searching hers for any sign that this was not real. She nodded, biting her lip as tears filled her eyes. "I've taken the tests, all of them. It is real." There was a long, tense silence as we both tried to wrap our heads around what this meant. She was carrying my child, conceived in the middle of this twisted affair. And Jake, he had no idea that the woman he thought was his would soon be carrying a baby that was not his. "Does Jake know?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel the tension tightening in my chest. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "He does not know anything. I have not told him yet. I do not know what to do." I stepped closer, placing my hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet my gaze. "Listen to me, Emily. This is our chance. Jake is not what you need anymore. You know that. He has been neglecting you for years, taking you for granted while you have been dealing with everything alone. But you are not alone now. You have me?" Her eyes were full of fear and doubt, but there was something else there too, a flicker of understanding. She knew things had changed. The gravity of the situation was sinking in. "I do not know if I can do this," she murmured, her voice shaky. "You can," I said, my voice firm but soft. "You do not have to go through this alone. You do not owe Jake anything anymore." She hesitated, biting her lip as the tears continued to fall, but I could see the shift in her, the realization that everything was changing whether she was ready for it or not. "I am scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I cupped her face in my hands, wiping away her tears with my thumbs. "You do not have to be. I am here. We will figure this out together." The weight of the situation hung over us both as we stood there in the stillness of the kitchen. Emily was pregnant with my child, and Jake had no idea. The irony of it all was not lost on me. He had stolen Sarah, and now I had taken something far more precious from him. The question now was what came next. We could not keep this secret forever. Sooner or later, the truth would come out, and when it did, the fallout would be catastrophic. But that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted Jake to feel the full weight of what he had done, to watch his life fall apart in ways he could not even imagine. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself as her hands rested on her stomach in a gesture that spoke volumes. She was starting to accept it now, starting to understand the magnitude of what we had done. "We will figure it out," I repeated, my voice soft but firm. "Together?" She nodded, her resolve hardening as she wiped the last of her tears away. "Okay." We both knew there was no going back now. Everything had changed. Soon enough, everyone would know. But for now, we would keep this secret a little longer, letting the tension build until it reached its breaking point. As we walked back into the party, I caught Jake's laughter echoing through the room, and Sarah's smile lighting up the space beside him. They had no idea their perfect little world was about to collapse, no idea that in a few short months, their lives would be irreparably shattered. Emily glanced at me, fear still lingering in her eyes, but also something darker, something deeper. This was no longer just about betrayal. This was about the reckoning that was coming for all of us. And it was only a matter of time before the truth exploded into the open, leaving destruction in its wake. When that happened, I would be the one standing in the ashes, watching as everything they valued burned to the ground.